You've almost finished your Camino. You're coming into Old Town. You're walking down the streets, and what's that you hear? A bagpipe? Yep. Stick around and I'll tell you why. The connection with the Celts and Galicia has a long and very tangled history. Looking at the map, you can clearly see that the distance between the lands is not very far. When you're on the ground, the landscape, the weather, and the general topography are very similar. Galicia looks like Ireland. Ireland looks like Scotland. Scotland looks like Galicia. So the land is similar, but how about the music? There's a thought that the Galician music might owe its roots to the ancient Celtic history of the region. But while the Celtic culture was first, it was ousted by the Romans, then the Germanic culture. What happened to the Celtic culture? Did it go underground for 1,000 years and then suddenly pop up in the 20th century? To see if there's a connection between the cultures, we need to delve a little bit into the history of Western music. Now, bear with me. I'm not going to bore you on this one. I'm going to give you a really fast, the Cliff Notes, nitty-gritty stuff. By the way, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. My doctorate is in music, actually, musicology. So music history is my thing. So bear with me. It's going to be interesting, I promise you. The medieval era began at about 500 CE, that's the Common Era, and it lasted through the 1400s. During this time, the primary source of music was the Catholic Church, and most of the music during this time was composed in Latin, which is the language of the church. So if you wanted to hear music outside of your neighbor yodeling and scaring all the dogs, you had to go to church. At first, it was monophonic, or just one melodic line, and the best example of this is the Gregorian chant, which we're all familiar with. So it was just a monophonic line with no accompaniment and no harmony. In the 9th century, the monks began experimenting with harmony, sort of. They added a voice above, typically 4 or 5 notes higher, and it paralleled the primary voice. This is called organum. Then in the 1100s, the people decided they wanted music also in their homes, in their villages, in their lives, not just in church. Also, they wanted fun stuff in their language with secular subjects such as love, romance, frolicking, stuff that they could relate to. They experimented with polyphony, which is more than one voice, and they all had an equal importance. They loved it and began adding instruments to their vocal music. In the 12th century, we have secular folk music, way more popular than the church music. This was a music that the people could relate to. It was written in their language and gave the people a unique way to expressively communicate their feelings. This leads Western music to the Renaissance era. The word Renaissance means rebirth, and the 1400s to the 1600s did exactly that. It gave us a music that really began to develop harmonies with more intricate forms of polyphony. The invention of the printing press allowed the music to be reproduced and sold. Instrumental music became more important than vocal alone, which led to the development of instruments, including brass instruments, woodwinds, guitars, and keyboard instruments. But with all the good you have to have the, well, not so good. The developing form of music became out of reach for the common folk. It left the communal environs and flourished in the courts for the wealthy patrons. This is where our Western music history lecture ends, and we can now talk about this new emerging music, which would become Galician folk music. As we mentioned earlier, Galicia has deep connections with the Celtic culture, but being so near the Western European countries, it also was influenced by them. So we get a beautiful and rich mixture of Celtic instruments, as well as these newly developed Renaissance instruments. The vocal music utilizes the language of the people, with the instrumental music going crazy with polyphony. Bagpipes are classified as belonging to the woodwind family. In other words, they're primarily made of wood, and they use wind to make the sound. The main part of the instrument is called the chanter. This is the flute-like part where you manipulate your fingers to create the different pitches. The top of the chanter is fitted with a double reed, similar to that used of our modern-day oboe or the bassoon. The air supply is furnished by a bag. For the Scottish bagpipe, the bag is filled with the player blowing air into a tube. In the Irish bagpipe, the bag is filled with air using a set of bellows under the arm that is opposite the air supply bag. Next, you have the drones. These are the pipes that are not fingered but produce a harmonizing note that will sound as long as the bag is full of air. All bagpipes have one, but can have 2, 3, or more. The reed in the drone pipes are a single reed, which are similar to a clarinet. Guess which bagpipes the Galician folk musicians use? Neither. They developed one that works similar to the Scottish bagpipe, but it's in a different key, usually with 2 drones that are tuned very differently to both the Scottish and the Irish bagpipes. The instrument can be played as a solo instrument, but it really comes to life when played in a small ensemble. The typical instrumental combination would be 2 bagpipes, 2 drummers. One of those would be a high-pitched drum, such as a snare drum, and the other a larger, low-pitched drum, like a bass drum, and then a tambourine. And it can get pretty lively. So did the Celtic Galicia folk music go underground for 1,000 years? Nope. It always was and continues to be a vital element of a culture that is the essence of folk music. In the strict definition of folk music, it's an oral tradition or an art form that is not written down, but it's passed on orally. When the printing press began mass producing and distributing the constant developing music of the Western world, the folk music was content to just relax and enjoy what they had. It didn't go underground, but remained where it was comfortable, in the homes and the local community. Remember the discussion of the medieval monks experimenting with harmony, developing a technique which we termed organum? The folk music of Galicia embraced this technique and continued to develop it. The melodic lines are typically parallel, either a 4th or a 5th scale degree apart. The rhythmic instruments often present counter rhythms, which accentuate patterns counter to that of the melody. The tunes are often in 6/8 time and very lively. In whole, this is a fun and very entertaining music to listen to. On one occasion, I was enjoying the sun in Plaza Obradorio and was surprised when I heard 2 gaita players in the tunnel. Loving the sounds I was hearing and the melody and the harmony, I captured a mental picture of the tune. I've arranged this jaunty melody for 4 French horns. This probably is the first time you or anyone has ever heard Gaita Gallega music performed on French horns. Hang on. Be sure and stick around to the end so you can hear our imitation of the bagpipes deflating. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had fun making it. Hey, if you like it, give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. And also, hey, leave a comment. I love reading your comments and I always respond back. Thank you for watching.